I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it. That's the bit that excites me, is the idea of being able to bring some change. Not overly radical change, but changes that I think.
The atmosphere over Windsor was heavy as whispers began to spread through the palace. What started as quiet concern soon turned into a wave of heartbreak that reached every corner of the royal estate. For Prince William, this was not just another royal announcement. It was deeply personal, cutting into memories he had fought hard to protect. He looked completely lost for words, one insider said. Tonight, the palace has finally broken its silence, and the truth behind the sorrow is out, a truth that will change everything for the future king and his family. The palace breaks its silence. The message came late when most of London had already turned off its lights. At exactly 11 p.m., a statement appeared on the palace's official page, short but heavy with emotion. Those who read it felt a pull in their hearts, sensing something deeper beneath the lines. The announcement spread like fire across phones, through newsrooms, and into living rooms. Reporters began gathering near Kensington, trying to piece together the reason behind the sudden release. "It feels different this time," said one journalist, rubbing his eyes as camera lenses focused. The past months had already worn William down. Behind his composed smile, those close to him knew he had been struggling. Between his father's frail health and his position as heir to the throne, the pressure grew heavier. The public saw him at events, greeting crowds and shaking hands, yet his eyes told another story. Each passing day seemed to add more weight to his shoulders. "He looks like a man trying to hold everything together," said a royal aide glancing across the corridor as William walked past without a word. The palace's statement finally confirmed what many had feared. It spoke of a private family matter that had caused deep sorrow for the Prince of Wales. Though details were carefully guarded, the tone left no doubt. It was personal and painful. There was mention of reflection, of the family needing space, and of gratitude for the nation's kindness. "It's something no one was ready for," whispered a senior staff member who had seen the document before its release. The world now knew the silence had not been avoidance, it had been grief. Beyond the gates, people began to gather as word spread. Flowers were placed on the railings, candles lit along the walkways. Across the country, television anchors paused before reading the official lines, their voices low and careful. Online, messages of sympathy filled every corner. "Stay strong, William," one woman wrote, her post shared thousands of times. Crowds in Windsor stood together, some crying openly, others just staring into the night. In that shared silence, a deep respect lingered. Many recalled how loss had shadowed his life from an early age. William had often spoken about his mother with tenderness, calling her his guide through difficult moments. Now, as people revisited old photos of Diana holding his hand, the resemblance in his grief became unmistakable. "He carries her strength," said an elderly man who had followed the family for decades. At home, Catherine stood beside him, offering support. "She's been his anchor," a family friend said, "the only one who can bring him back when he drifts too far into his thoughts." The statement's closing words were simple, a request for understanding and privacy. However, those words hinted at something larger, a shift in royal life. For years, William had been seen as the steady bridge between the monarchy's old ways and its future. Now, the thought of him stepping back, even briefly, felt like a pause in the nation's heartbeat. "He'll come through it," said one palace worker, setting down her phone after reading the message. "He always does, but this time feels different." Outside, the London air grew cold, wrapping the palace in mist. Reporters stayed at their posts, their breath rising like smoke in the light. Inside, behind those stone walls, the heir to the throne sat with his head bowed, trying to gather himself. Every sound seemed to press heavier. "He just said, 'I need a moment,'" a close friend later shared, recalling how William had walked out to the terrace and stood there for over an hour. The moonlight fell across the courtyard, and in that stillness, the future king looked like a man trying to find his balance between duty and pain. By dawn, the palace curtains stayed drawn. Royal aides moved quietly, arranging calls and messages of condolence. The phones didn't stop ringing. Yet somewhere in the middle of it all, William took a walk through the gardens before sunrise. "He didn't say anything," said the guard who saw him. He just looked up at the sky and stood there a while. It wasn't the image of a prince, it was the image of a man who had experienced loss and was trying to hold on. Across the nation, prayers rose for him and his family. When the first light broke across the palace roof, it touched the walls with pale gold. The world was still talking, still waiting for clarity, but inside, William was simply breathing through another morning. The news had broken hearts across Britain, but none more than his own. Still, there was something unsaid in his posture. Not surrender, but endurance. "He'll carry on," said an older courtier. "He always does because he must." And as the day rose fully, the palace held within it a grief both royal and profoundly human. Public and media response. As dawn broke over London, the palace's statement had already swept across every television, newspaper, and digital screen. News presenters spoke with softened tones, their voices carrying both shock and empathy. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, wrapped in coats and scarves, faces filled with disbelief. Cameras flashed as reporters tried to capture every face, every hint of sorrow. The gates turned into a wall of flowers, cards, and hands pressing against the bars, as though reaching for comfort within. On social media, the reaction was instant and overwhelming. Hashtags linked millions in a shared wave of grief. Videos poured in from across the world, from New York to Sydney, with candles flickering in tribute and soft music playing beneath photos of the prince and his family. Some wrote about his strength, others about the unbearable pressure he carried. "He never asked for pity," one post read, "but he always showed grace." It was clear the world wasn't just mourning a headline. It was mourning a man they had come to know through years of watching his endurance. Television commentators, who often spoke with distance, now spoke with personal emotion. "You can hear it in their voices," a viewer remarked online. "They're not reading from a script anymore." Analysts discussed the possible political and family impact, but the tone remained deeply human. A well-known broadcaster paused mid-sentence during a live segment, her voice breaking. "He's been through too much loss for one lifetime," she said, lowering her eyes. The moment spread quickly across the internet, replayed over and again. In the streets of London, conversation shifted as people spoke about the news. "He always looked so steady," said an elderly man at a bakery counter. "But you never really know what people are carrying." Taxi drivers turned up the radio as the news played, nodding slowly. "You've got to respect how he's handled things," said one driver. "Never snapped, never hid. That takes something strong." It wasn't royal status that people discussed now. It was character, the kind that shows in grief and dignity rather than power or privilege. Outside the palace gates, more tributes arrived by the hour. Messages written in every language filled the air with emotion. "You're not alone," one card read. "We're standing with you." Children placed hand-drawn pictures on the ground, some showing the prince beside his family under a bright sky. "He looked tired on TV," a little boy told his mother. "I hope he sleeps tonight." Volunteers from the neighborhood brought tea and blankets to those waiting in the cold. "It's like the whole city stopped arguing for one day," said a man. At news headquarters, editors debated how to cover the story respectfully. For once, even the more aggressive tabloids held back. "We wanted to show care, not chaos," admitted one editor later. "It's not a scandal, it's a sorrow." The headlines were simple and direct, some just reading "Our hearts with the prince." Photographs of William with his children filled the front pages, often showing his hand resting gently on their shoulders. The images spoke more than words, a man trying to stay strong for those who needed him most. Royal commentators reminded audiences of the prince's journey, from his boyhood marked by tragedy to his years as a father trying to create stability. "He's been shaped by grief," said one historian during a BBC panel, "but each time he's risen from it." The panelists spoke not with speculation, but with admiration. The story no longer belonged to rumor or politics, it belonged to compassion. "It's rare," said another guest, "to see a figure so public, yet so human. That's why people are hurting." As night approached again, vigils formed across the United Kingdom. Outside Windsor Castle, hundreds held candles, their flickering light painting the faces of strangers who had come together in unity. "I didn't even plan to come," said a nurse, tears shining under the glow. I just felt I should be here." A small choir began to sing softly, their voices trembling through the cool air. The song spread through the crowd, some joining, others simply listening. It wasn't rehearsed. It was something pure, born of shared sorrow. By midnight, the nation seemed to breathe as one, a mixture of grief, pride, and compassion. Online, posts turned from shock to solidarity. "He doesn't have to face it alone," one message read. "We'll keep him in our hearts." Newsrooms dimmed their lights, broadcasters ended their coverage with gentle music, and the streets slowly emptied. Yet the emotion remained. People went home carrying it, unable to shake the image of the prince standing tall despite his heartbreak. And somewhere within those palace walls, as the world's lights dimmed, he must have known the depth of that care. Millions of unseen faces holding him in their thoughts. The country had spoken, not through speeches or politics, but through the simplest language there is, empathy. It was not the grandeur of a crown that united them that night, but the shared feeling of being human, the recognition that even the strongest hearts can break, and that even in that breaking, they can bring people closer together than ever before. Prince William's recent struggles and pressure. The past year had tested Prince William in ways few could understand. From the outside, he appeared composed, delivering speeches and attending state duties with ease. But those who worked near him saw the exhaustion behind his eyes. Each day seemed to demand more of him, pulling him between duty and family. An assistant softly described how he worked through dinners and often stayed awake past midnight reviewing schedules. The weight of expectation had turned his once effortless smile into something slower, almost forced. After the king's illness became public, the pressure around William multiplied. He suddenly found himself standing closer to the throne, carrying responsibilities that once belonged to his father. "He barely breathes between meetings," a staffer noted, watching him stride past with his folder under one arm. Yet, even as he handled the official load, there were personal storms gathering at home. Catherine's recovery had been difficult, and William refused to leave her side when she needed him most. "He wants to be a husband first," said a friend, "but the crown never waits." There were mornings when he looked out the palace window and saw crowds waving Union flags, and something in his expression seemed to show, pride mixed with pressure. He had taken his mother's empathy, and with it, her burden of feeling too deeply. "He takes everything to heart," a former aide recalled. "When people suffer, he feels it as if it were his own pain." That tenderness, once his strength had started to drain him. At night, he pacing through rooms, whispering to himself as if searching for a balance that never came. Even the smallest actions began to show his fatigue. At a recent charity event, cameras caught him rubbing the back of his neck as if trying to ease the pain he carried. He smiled through the speeches, but those close enough could see his fingers trembling slightly. "He's pushing through," a photographer remarked, "but you can tell he's not sleeping much." The long corridors of the palace became his track for thought, a place where he walked alone after everyone left, replaying the day in silence, trying to find strength. For William, the hardest moments came when duty clashed with family. His children often waited by the door when he left early. "Daddy, will you be home tonight?" little Charlotte once asked, tugging at his sleeve. He crouched down, kissed her forehead, and said, "I'll try my best." But many nights he didn't make it back before they were asleep. Those missed moments cut deeper than he ever admitted. "He worries they'll grow up not knowing what normal feels like," a family friend said. The crown demanded perfection, but his heart longed for the simple joys of life. In private meetings, aides noticed his patience thinning. He listened carefully, but often stared into space before answering, as if his mind were somewhere else entirely. "He's here, but not here," one advisor whispered to another during a briefing. The strain of public life had begun to shape him. He still joked occasionally, showing that familiar grin that reminded everyone of his mother, but it came like lightning, bright, brief, and gone before anyone could hold it. "He's lost that lightness," an old friend admitted, "but he hasn't lost his will." When Catherine's health reports improved slightly, he seemed to live again for the first time in months. They took a short walk through the gardens together, hand in hand, unnoticed by the press. He said it felt like the world had stopped spinning, a family friend recalled. But the pause didn't last long. The very next day, Parliament requested his attendance for a meeting concerning future royal transitions. He went, but those close to him said he looked miles away. "He's trying to serve two worlds," said a senior courtier, "the one he loves and the one he leads." At times his composure cracked in small human ways. Once, after a long briefing about public spending, he dropped his pen and sighed heavily. "It never ends," he muttered, unaware anyone heard. Another time during a royal visit, a little boy asked him, "Do you miss your mom?" He smiled gently and said, "Every day." The crowd clapped softly, not realizing how raw the words were. "That was the only real moment in the whole event," said a journalist who covered it. "Everything else was duty. That line was love." He confided in very few people, often choosing silence over conversation. Even among his own team, he remained distant. "He doesn't talk about feelings," one member of staff said. "He just works harder." He checked constantly for updates from Catherine or his father's aides. There were nights when he'd step out onto the balcony, staring at the city lights as if trying to draw strength from them. He said the silence makes him think of his mother, a friend revealed softly. It was in those rare moments of stillness that his royal mask slipped, revealing the weary man behind it. Despite it all, he never let his personal pain become public play. He smiled when needed and spoke with grace. Though when cameras turned off, the exhaustion always returned. "He's holding the family together," said a cousin, "and that takes more strength than people know." Some nights he'd call old friends just to talk about ordinary things. Football, childhood memories, anything but royal duties. "He said he misses being just William," one of them recalled. "He said sometimes he forgets what that even feels like." He still visits hospitals, still bends to speak with children, still nods through endless meetings, but the light behind his eyes flickers constantly. "He doesn't complain," said a senior aide, "but you can feel the weight when he walks into a room." For a man raised to rule, he remains very much human, devoted, loyal, and burdened by love and duty intertwined. And so, as night falls again over London, he exhales, rubs his eyes, and murmurs, "Tomorrow will be better." Whether he believes it or not, no one knows, but he says it anyway because he must. Emotional reactions from inside the palace. The night the statement went public, the mood inside Kensington Palace changed in an instant. Before then, everyone had been moving slow, eyes fixed on their tasks but minds elsewhere. As soon as the message appeared on every screen across Britain, silence fell like a curtain. No one quite knew what to say. "It's out now," whispered a clerk near the communications office, glancing toward the corridor where the prince's private study was located. For the first time in days, the truth was no longer trapped behind palace walls. Upstairs, aides stood by their phones, watching messages flood in from officials, friends, and international figures. "The phones wouldn't stop buzzing," one assistant said, rubbing his eyes. "It just felt like the world had leaned in on us." Downstairs, the security staff gathered near the monitors, staring at news anchors, reading the very lines they had seen typed hours earlier. Even those trained to show no emotion struggled that night. "He's our boss, but he's also just a man we respect," said a guard quietly. "Seeing him go through this hurts." After the statement went live, William had retreated to his office and stayed there for a long time, speaking only once. "He asked for a few minutes," said his private secretary, and everyone stepped back. When he finally emerged, his face was pale but steady, his voice calm yet filled with raw emotions. He said, "Thank you for standing by me," recalled an aide. The small group nodded, no one daring to reply. He then turned away, heading toward the window, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. That night, Catherine stayed mostly in her private rooms, yet her presence was felt throughout the palace. "She kept checking on everyone," said a maid who brought her tea. "She asked if we were managing, if the staff were eating, if anyone needed rest." It was a small gesture, but it reminded everyone that compassion still flowed within those walls. "She's his strength," a senior aide said. "He draws everything from her." The two were seen later walking through the corridor, heads close, speaking softly. "We'll get through this together," Catherine told him. Meanwhile, in the royal press office, reporters from around the world kept calling, demanding for comments. The staff worked in hushed tones, printing out statements and fielding requests. We had to say no to almost everyone, one officer recalled. The palace was grieving, not performing. For those inside, it wasn't just another media storm. It was a night when the weight of their loyalty met the fragility of their hearts. "He doesn't see us as workers," said another aide. "He sees us as part of the circle. That's why we feel it so deeply." At the same time, members of the royal household across other estates reached out. Messages came from Windsor, Sandringham, and Balmoral, each offering comfort in their own way. Some sent brief notes, others simply wrote, "We're with you." "It's really encouraging," said a senior clerk who helped organize the replies. Late into the night, she watched as William personally signed short thank you messages. He said he didn't want anyone to think he was ignoring them, she recalled. Even in grief, he thought of duty. By midnight, the palace lights dimmed. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving only a few guards and late-night aides. The palace felt emptier than usual. Footsteps echoed, doors clicked shut, and somewhere deep within, a piano could be faintly heard. Just a few light notes from someone trying to ease the tension. "I heard it too," said a steward. It was gentle, almost sad. It sounded like someone saying goodbye. Outside, the city lights reflected off the palace windows, while the flag swayed in the wind. Those who remained awake noticed the prince walking through the hall near the main gallery, his steps slow and thoughtful. "He nodded when he saw us," said a night guard, and said, "It's been a long day." He stood there for a moment, glancing at an old portrait of his mother, before turning away. He whispered something under his breath, the guard added. "I couldn't hear the words, but I think it was her name." That image stayed with everyone who witnessed it. By dawn, the palace stirred again. He came down early, thanked everyone again, and asked how we were holding up. That surprised them. "He was the one who'd lost the most, but he still worried about us," she said, her eyes glistening. That small act of grace reminded them why loyalty to him felt effortless, because he never forgot the people who stood behind him. And in that moment, everyone who served within those ancient walls felt united by one simple truth. Behind every title, behind every tradition, there still beats a human heart trying to heal, looking back at deep bonds. While the palace still slept and the world outside had not awakened, Prince William often found himself drawn to memories. Faces, voices, and moments that never truly faded. His life had been lived beneath the weight of history, yet at its center it was shaped by something far simpler: love and loss. "He doesn't talk about the past much," said a friend once, "but you can see when he's thinking of her." Those who know him well understand that his mother, Princess Diana, still walks with him in spirit, a constant, invisible presence that both comforts and haunts him. He had been only 15 when he followed her coffin through London's streets, his head bowed, the world watching every step. That day changed him forever, an old family associate said. He learned that grief doesn't go away, it just finds new corners to live in. From that moment, duty became not just a royal word, but a promise to honor her memory. He once said, "Everything I do, I try to do the way she would have wanted," shared a former aide. That guiding light shaped the man he became, compassionate but firm, emotional yet restrained. For William, the current heartbreak reopened those old wounds. "He's been through loss before," said a palace insider, "but every time it reminds him of the first one, the one he never truly healed from." He often speaks of his mother to his children. "He tells them about her laughter," said a friend. "He says she was the kind of person who could make the whole room lighter." Those stories have become a bridge between generations, a way for his children to know the grandmother they never met. His bond with Catherine has been another kind of strength, built on shared endurance. "They met young," recalled a university friend, "and even then, you could tell she steadied him. Through every storm, public and private, she became the one constant he could return to. He trusts her more than anyone," said an aide. "She was one of the best things that ever happened to him. When the world spins out of control, she brings him back to earth." He once called Catherine his peace, shared a confidant. And now, more than ever, she's the reason he's standing. Their marriage has faced immense pressure, scrutiny, endless speculation, and the impossible balance between public service and private life. They've had to grow up faster than most couples, a family friend admitted, but they did it together. Catherine's steadiness became his anchor through his father's illness, his brother's distance, and now this fresh pain. When she holds his hand, you can see the shift in him, said a royal photographer. It's like everything else fades. In private moments, she reminds him that he's not just a future king. He's a husband, a father, and a son bearing the pain of a mother gone too soon. His children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, are to him both joy and salvation. He says they give him reasons to keep going, revealed a close friend. He often takes them on walks through the gardens or out to the countryside, away from the noise of the world. He tells them stories about when he was their age, said a nanny. He wants them to see that their father wasn't born into perfection, that he had learnt how to be strong. Watching them laugh, run, and grow has healed parts of him he thought would never mend. When I look at them, I see hope, the kind I lost when I was a boy, William said sadly. Still, every moment of happiness comes with the shadow of what's been lost. When his children hug him, you can almost see his heart break a little, an aide confessed, because he knows how it feels to grow up missing a parent. That awareness drives everything he does as a father, the school runs, the bedtime stories, the weekend adventures. The parallels between his past and present weigh heavily. It's like life keeps testing him, said a royal aide. Every time he stands up again, something tries to pull him back down. Yet he faces it all with the same resilience he learned long ago. You don't move on from grief, you grow around it, he once said. That belief shapes the way he handles every hardship, by turning it into purpose. When he visits charities, mental health centers, or the streets, those who meet him say there's something genuine in his eyes. And through all of it, his mother's legacy, his wife's strength, his children's laughter, runs one thread. Beneath the ceremonies and titles, beneath the centuries of expectation, he remains a man trying to balance love and loss. He carries everything so well, said a family friend, but it's there, the ache, the memories, the promise he made to never let her down. That promise drives him, even when the weight feels unbearable. He's the bridge between what was lost and what must live on, said another, and that's not a crown anyone can see. As the world watches him face yet another test, those closest to him see not a prince, but a son carrying his mother's legacy, a husband standing beside his wife, and a father building the childhood he once wished he'd had. The headlines may fade, but these bonds, these invisible ties of love, pain, and duty, remain unbroken. He's lived his life carrying ghosts and blessings side by side, said a family member, and maybe that's what makes him who he is, a man who keeps walking forward no matter how heavy the past feels, because he knows love is the one thing that never really leaves. A network of love. Inside Kensington Palace, the atmosphere was unguarded. While the official statement had already set the tone for the public, it was behind those closed doors that the truest emotions came to light. Friends who had known William since childhood arrived, entering through side gates under the watchful eyes of security. He didn't want attention, said one of them. He just needed familiar faces. They gathered in a small sitting room, the air heavy with unspoken grief. No one really knew what to say, another friend murmured. We just sat there, letting him lead. Among those who came early was an old schoolmate who had seen William through some of his darkest years. He looked exhausted, he later said, not from duty, but from holding everything together for everyone else. He placed a hand on William's shoulder, a simple gesture that said more than any words could, and that was enough. It's like he understood that we were there not to talk, but to stay, the friend concluded. The bond between them, built on decades of loyalty, carried more comfort than speeches or reassurances. Other close friends shared similar feelings. Many spoke of how deeply protective William had always been, of his wife, his children, and even those who worked for him. He's always the one checking on others, said a longtime companion, but when things fall apart, he doesn't know how to let people check on him. That night, though, he allowed it. He shouldn't have to carry this alone, one friend commented. The prince said little, but when he finally spoke, his words were simple. I'll be all right, he said. I just need time. Family members soon arrived, each showing support in their own way. Princess Anne came early, her expression as steady as ever. "She hugged him longer than I've ever seen," said an observer. She told him, "You've done everything right, don't doubt that." Her voice was firm but gentle, the kind that soothes the soul. Prince Edward and Sophie followed later, their visit short but heartfelt. They said they were there if he needed anything, an aide shared. He thanked them, but you could see the weight still sitting on him. Meanwhile, Harry's name began to circulate. The brothers' strained relationship had been the subject of speculation, but this time the tone was different. "He called," said a palace insider. It wasn't long, but it was sincere. The two spoke, voices low and cautious, but not cold. For a moment, old wounds softened under the shared weight of sorrow. They didn't argue, the insider added. They just were no longer boys, but men remembering what once bound them. That one call offered understanding without expectation. Catherine's parents also visited the next morning. Her mother carried a bouquet of simple white flowers, her father a look of concern. "They've always treated him like a son," said a family friend. They didn't say much, they didn't have to. When Catherine saw them, she broke down for the first time since the news broke. "It was the release she needed," said the friend. "She'd been strong for him, for the children, for everyone." William stood beside her, his hand gripping hers tightly. You could see the love between them. It kept them standing. Close friends from the couple's early days in Anglesey also sent messages. "He loved it there because no one treated him like a prince," said one. "He was just Will." One text read, "We're still here, mate. You don't have to face it alone." He reportedly smiled faintly when he saw it. "They always know how to reach me," he shared. That brief moment of warmth reminded everyone that beyond the formality of royal life, he still had a circle that grounded him, people who saw the man before the title. "They're his safe place," said a friend, and he needed that more than ever. In Balmoral, where so many royal memories are rooted, older relatives followed the updates closely. "They're worried," said a family associate. "They've seen too many heartbreaks in this family." One of the Queen's cousins sent a handwritten note, a rare gesture in these digital times. It read simply, "You are loved, and you are not alone." Those words moved the prince deeply. He kept it on his desk, said an insider. It reminded him that even when the family doesn't always agree, love still finds its way through. By the evening of the second day, the inner circle had expanded slightly. Senior aides, childhood friends, and close family members gathered for a small dinner. "He thanked everyone for being there," one attendee said. "You've done more than you know," William spoke softly to them. The conversation stayed mild, wandering between memories and moments of silence. Someone joked about an old trip they'd taken, and for a second a faint laugh escaped him. "That's when I knew he was finding his way back," said the same person. "It wasn't joy, but it was life." Later that night, after everyone left, he walked Catherine to the children's rooms. The little ones had drawn pictures for him earlier that day. Bright colors, smiling faces, hearts everywhere. He looked at one that said, "We love you, Daddy." And he just nodded, said a nanny. He didn't cry, he just touched it like it was sacred. As he stood, surrounded by those reminders of love and innocence, and a measure of peace returned to his face. The storm outside had not passed, but within those walls, he was no longer alone. By morning, family members who had stayed overnight gathered for breakfast, their presence a steady reassurance. "He seemed lighter," said an aide who poured the tea. The bonds that had been strained by time and distance now seemed to tighten again. "It's strange how loss can mend what distance breaks," one family member reflected. They all felt it. The need to hold one another close before the world demanded their composure again. For the first time since the heartbreak began, they began to feel not just sorrow, but something real, cutting down the weight of responsibility. The morning after the wave of grief settled over the nation, the first official signs of ease began to appear. Notices from the palace confirmed that Prince William's upcoming public engagements were to be postponed. "The Prince of Wales will take time away from his official duties," the message read. The words rippled through the country like a chill wind. "It feels strange not to see him. said a man outside a community center where William had planned to appear that week. He didn't want to stop, but everyone agreed he needed space. Within the palace, the suspension of duties created an unusual stillness. Schedules once packed with briefings, meetings, and appearances were wiped clean. It was like the rhythm of the house broke, said one staff member. He's the heartbeat of it. And suddenly, everything slowed down. For the first time in years, the prince was able to step away from the relentless pace of public life. He kept asking about the teams, another aide recalled, but in truth it was him who needed care, someone to remind him that even leaders are allowed to rest. Behind the decision to suspend his duties lay deep discussions between the palace and government advisors. They all agreed the public would understand, said a correspondent. Still, William hesitated. He didn't want anyone to think he was running from responsibility, shared a close advisor, but those around him reminded him that strength is not measured only by endurance. Maybe you're right. Maybe I need to stop pretending I'm made of stone, William cited. For those who knew him, it marked a rare moment of vulnerability from a man trained to never show it. As the suspension took effect, the media framed it with empathy. Newspapers spoke of compassion and understanding rather than criticism. It's the most human decision he's ever made, one headline read. Television programs devoted segments to the idea of royal humanity, discussing how even the most visible figures deserve a break. We expect them to be unbreakable, said one commentator, but grief doesn't care about titles. Public support flooded in, letters arriving at the palace in thick bundles. Inside the royal household, adjustments followed quickly. Catherine took on a few small engagements, easing the pressure from her husband while maintaining a sense of continuity. We'll do this together, she told her staff. Meanwhile, senior officials began to reassign appearances and public duties to other family members. Everyone wanted to help, said a palace insider. They knew he wouldn't rest unless others stepped forward. Yet even with others filling the gaps, his absence was deeply felt. For William himself, the first days away from duty were filled with mixed emotions. He spent long hours in his study, going over letters, reading, and writing notes by hand. He's not one to sit idle, said an aide. Even rest for him means reflection. He was seen walking the palace gardens alone, sometimes with his dog beside him, pausing near the fountain his mother once loved. He looked lost in thought, said a gardener. He didn't speak, just stood there for a long while. Those moments, though private, became quiet acts of healing. Outside, people noticed his absence at national events. At a veterans ceremony where he was meant to deliver a speech, his empty seat drew attention. It wasn't just a missing chair, said one attendee. It was a reminder that even the strong ones break. Across the Commonwealth, his temporary withdrawal became a sign of humanity rather than weakness. He's showing the world that strength includes stepping back, a Canadian commentator said. Social media echoed the sentiment, with thousands sharing messages of support. During this period, William found comfort in the simple routines of family life. He took the kids to school himself, said a parent who saw him at the gate. He smiled politely, but you could tell he was carrying a lot. Evenings were quieter, centered on home-cooked meals and bedtime stories. It was in these moments that he found relief. He spent time with Catherine, walking their estate paths, talking about everything and nothing. The crown can wait, we can't, she told him. Their togetherness became his refuge from the weight of expectation that never seemed to lift. As weeks passed, talk began about when he might resume his duties. He didn't set a date, said a palace source. He said, "I'll know when it feels right." Advisors gently suggested gradual reintroduction, perhaps one appearance at a time. He agreed, but only if it wouldn't look forced, they recalled. "I'll go back when I can give it my all again," William said. His focus remained on balance, learning perhaps for the first time that leadership also means knowing when to pause, and so the palace continued to function, but at a slower pace. His absence became a lesson, not only to those who served under him, but to the country itself. That responsibility can coexist with fragility, that leaders are not made of steel, but of flesh and feeling. "He'll return," said one staff member confidently, "and when he does, he'll be stronger, not because he pushed through pain, but because he allowed himself to feel it." And as the light faded over Kensington that evening, the nation waited for the moment when the prince would step forward once more. What are your thoughts on how Prince William handled his emotions? Let us know your views in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to this channel. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.